Welcome to the Adventures in Learning podcast. I am thrilled to have Matt de la Peña on with us today. As a STEM teacher, I have used his works in so many different ways, from building connections, making patchwork quilts, to working with kids to talk about community, as we have worked with Last Stop on Market Street and Carmela Full of Wishes. I've talked about connections using love, and today we're going to talk about hope. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Diane.
I am so excited to have you. Your work has formed it's been important to the body of what I do when I work with teachers, because there's always so much heart in it. I actually wanted to start with a question that a seventh grader gave me who
Sure.
loves your books, and I thought it was a good question. Um, they wanted to know, where does your inspiration come from? And second part of the question from Mariah was, how is it different writing for seventh graders than for picture book readers?
Hmm. Okay, so where does my inspiration come from? Mostly real life. I always say the greatest, inspiration is the experiences you've had. Like I think sometimes I don't even know if I'm writing, making up stories or just plagiarizing the world. Um, so it's stuff that's happened to me. It's things that have happened to family members or friends that they've allowed me to explore. So that's where the stories come from. In terms of the difference, um, I like the idea of every time I come up with a new story, I think of it as like, this is a football play. And now I have to figure out who's the best running back to hand it to, or, who can execute this play. So that means that sometimes it's better for like fewer words and more of a like a poem format. And sometimes I want to write something longer where I can kind of like go down little alleys and make mistakes. And then it's going to end up being a novel. So I don't think there's a huge difference in terms of my mindset. It's just, I feel like this is a better place to put this story.
Oh, I like that. And I was thinking about that in terms of Patchwork, which I've
Yeah.
got behind me. I had Corrina Luyken on the show a while back when the book came out, and we were talking about the book, and she was sort of speculating which parts were more Matt.
Yeah.
And she talked about the girl who gives her sandwich, that she, or her cookie, that she could totally visualize you being the kid who shared your cookie, that you were that
That's
kind.
funny.
I was wondering, is that autobiographical? Was the book autobiographical? Are there parts that are more you than others?
Well, definitely the basketball one. The kid who's obsessed with the game of basketball and then somehow like shifts to a similar rhythm he finds in poetry. So that one's very, very much me. But I have to be honest, like all of those started from me. Um, I guess in that way, it's kind of like a selfish approach. And then once you get it on the page, then you have to revise it into its best form and you sort of end up divorcing yourself from it. But yeah, I think all of those little vignettes they started with me. And then one other thing I'll say about Patchwork, sometimes I feel like I write YA picture books, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, we always have this idea that, oh, it's a picture book format. There are pictures on every page. Therefore, let's turn to the second and third graders. Which, by the way, that's fine. This is the way it works. But for me, when I'm writing it, I definitely am not just thinking about a certain age, for better or worse. So sometimes when I read a picture book, I like want to read it to college students more than anyone else, or even parents. And then other times I write a picture book like Carmela, where I can't wait to read it to second graders. So,
Well, yeah.
yeah.
No, that makes total sense. And honestly, with Patchwork, the audience that I've found has responded so strongly to it have been teachers. When
Hmm.
I take it out and I read it to them, and I actually have them create a patchwork using post-it notes of their preschool self or their past self, their current self, and then their dream or aspirational self. And
I love that.
they structure a quilt together of all of those selves. But I use it with college students as well because they can connect to it.
Yeah.
But books like Last Stop on Marketplace or on Market Street or Carmela Full of Wishes, those really resonate across audiences. It's not just the littles. It
Yeah.
really carries up. In fact, one of the seventh graders, Zion, wanted to ask you the question, why did you write Carmela Full of Wishes? Like that one really resonated for them in seventh grade.
Well, Carmela is probably my favorite picture book that I've been a part of, even though technically you're not supposed to have favorites. There's just something special about that book. And it actually started as a line that I heard at a school when I was visiting. So I was there for the full day, had to do three presentations. And then during lunch, I just hung out with the teacher, that was like my host. And there was one kid who had gotten in trouble. It's a predominantly Mexican American community, and he wasn't allowed to play soccer during lunch. And he was very bummed because he loved soccer. So he was standing next to the teacher too. And it just so happened that the school was next to this field and it was a very windy day. And there were dandelions on this field, and the wind was whipping so quickly, it was picking up some dandelion spores. They were floating over the soccer field. And this boy, he said this line that blew me away. And I'm sure Diane, that sometimes kids say the most poetic things, sometimes
Absolutely.
accidentally. And he said, "Look, miss, the sky is full of wishes." And I was like, oh my God, like that's an incredible line. I have to figure out how could that become a picture book. So I started with that kernel and then I sort of built around it. But then I'm also in that book, it's very much me honoring the Mexican side of my background. I'm half Mexican, half white. And I thought a lot about, growing up next to the border, being around a lot of kids who are from mixed status families where one parent is a citizen, one is undocumented. And there's that experience in my family history. So I wanted to kind of explore that and thinking about what is a wish when you have this sort of background? Does it change? Is it similar in many ways? And so I just kind of wanted to see what happened as I explored that.
I love that. So that kind of inspiration, sometimes it comes from kids, sometimes it comes from real life. You and Loren Long had done Love, and you've currently got Hope coming out. What was the inspiration behind those two books?
So Love was the first one. And I remember there was one moment in Love that started the whole book. There's a family huddled around a TV, and it's something that's making them anxious is on the screen. And the grandmother's holding up her pothole covered hand because a little girl has just come out of bed to see what the commotion is about. But she thinks that this is a little too old for you. You should stay where you are. That is where the book began from. And I think, I was a brand new parent and I was trying to figure out how to navigate like watching TV news and, it's all like everybody hates everyone else and the left hates the right hates the left, et cetera, et cetera. How do you go from that weird anxious feeling you get from watching the news to going into your new daughter's bedroom and reading her a book and trying to tell her that the world is beautiful? So I was like, I just wish there was a tool that could like allow me to just infuse love on every page. And so that's where the book started. And then when it got over to Loren's a very collaborative partner. So when we work on a book together, we talk about every line and where did it come from. Never prescriptive about the pictures. Of course, he's going to do that, but he wants to talk about where everything came from and what were you thinking. And then he ended up showing me some sketches. And I remember we had this massive decision with Love where there was a boy under the piano and his parents had just been fighting. And it's a scary moment. And I remember the first sketch Loren showed me, it was something much softer. It was the death of a pet. And, it was like everyone was huddled around while they were saying a few words about the pet. And he was like, "What do you think about this?" And I was like, "Oh, it's beautiful." And then I said, "But what would you do in this vignette if you could do anything you want?" And then he immediately thought, alcoholism has harmed so many members of my family. do you think we could really do that in a picture book though? And I said, probably not, but let's try, because it just felt true. And then you have to calibrate how loud that part of the story is going to be. So if it's in a YA, you turn it up a little bit. But if it's in a picture book, you turn it way down, but it's still there in the background. What led Loren to that image? So that was love. We always wanted to explore another idea. Um, Sorry, I'm kind of filibustering here, but there's one
You
more.
can filibuster away. I'm enjoying this.
Well, there's one other thing. Like, I feel like when I write a picture book, I write two different kinds. There's the character-driven book, and there's the concept-driven book. So love obviously would be the concept book. So we wanted to do another concept type book, and we were wrapping our head around what word, what idea do we want to explore? And then the pandemic hit, and I'm in San Diego, he's in Cincinnati, and I'm thinking, gosh, it's so strange being, kind of in our house all the time, and I was trying to like understand what this concept of home meant for me now that it didn't mean to me maybe a year ago. And so that is where the book Home began. And I was watching like nature reclaim some spaces that humans had been dominating. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. So I guess you could say home was born out of love. But again, it was made clear to me that this is what needed to be explored during the pandemic.
I love that. And it makes me remember during the pandemic, you did a whole series of newsletters for
Yeah.
teachers and parents. And for me, when I was at home, those letters sustained me.
Oh,
And they gave me hope and sort of a sense of what it meant to be at home with your family and
yeah.
how could you step out and make a difference for other people. So I just wanted to honor you for that
Thank you.
because that
Thank
was
you.
huge. Um, so that happened during the pandemic, but it's taken 4 years for Home to come out.
Yes.
Um, what was the process like for creating Home during that time? The idea was born of the pandemic, but obviously a lot of life has gone under the bridge since then.
Yeah. So this is what I love about books. And this is kind of going back to something I said earlier. You start in one place, and then as you're exploring the book, it becomes something new. And there's a great line that I think is attributed to, playwriting, but the idea is always leave a door open in your scene because you never know who's going to walk through. So I think as a writer, you have to like balance, here's the design that I envision, but here's the open door, allowing, things to happen along the way that change everything. So for me, that's what happened. And I was thinking a lot about, this idea that we as humans, like we've been led to believe what we need to do is dominate the earth to make space for ourselves and our creations and our stories or politics. But as we've been doing that, over time, we've divorced ourselves from the earth. And I think to me, this whole book is about a reintegration, or at least a proposed reintegration. So at the beginning of the book, everything that has to do with home is attached to industry. Like the parent is reading a book to, her child at the very beginning of the story, but it's over the sound of the freeway, the humming of the freeway coming in through the open window. Or the grandfather is fishing on a houseboat, but there's in the distance, there's the hum or the blowing horn of the barge. So everything is connected to industry. And over the course of time, a kid starts to think, well, ambition is what it's about. It's, building our human things. But then, like love, there's a disruption in the middle where somebody learns how you can lose a home. And now you have to kind of recalibrate what home means to you now. And so ultimately, it's a turn toward nature and seeing just the awesome ocean. I live in San Diego now, and one of the things I loved to do with my son and my daughter is during the pandemic, we'd go down to the ocean and we'd look at it, and I'd be like, look at this. this ocean has seen it all. It's so much bigger than us. Like it does the same thing every day. It like slowly moves in and slowly moves out as the tides change. And so I was just thinking like nature is the wisest, entity we can turn to during things like that.
I've been thinking about that a lot lately. One of the things the pandemic brought for me was the idea of daily nature walks. And
That's great.
there's a grove of trees near us, and it's sort of the same feeling as the ocean. It's realizing that my span of life, I'm like a wildflower compared
Totally.
to the life of the tree. And
Yep.
how much time has that tree spent? And what would happen if we joined the tree in the slow lane?
I love that. I love that. That's a great idea. By the way, do you leave your phone at home while you take the walk?
So I've tried, but
Yeah.
I find I like to hear, like, I've been using Merlin to try to identify the birds.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
So what I do is I keep the phone in my pocket until I hear something. I'll use the phone to be able to identify the bird. And now I'm finding I don't need it as much because my ear has become attuned to
Oh, I love
that's a
that.
woodpecker or that's a cardinal. But it took sort of that transition. So it's sort of a little bit, I've been calling it disconnecting in order to connect.
I love it. By the way, that's a picture book. Join the tree in the slow lane. That's a picture book.
I might steal that one.
Well, you don't have to steal it. You came up with it.
That's true. I'm writing it down so I don't forget.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I have found that that's so important. And I was thinking about the concept of home as you were talking, with the fires that recently happened in
Yes.
Los Angeles. Talk about a recalibration for what home means. And I
Well,
think we're finding that just across the country. I mean, I know my daughter is living, I've got one daughter living in New York, one in Richmond,
yeah,
and they're sort of re experiencing what does it mean to build home. And it's more than your tiny apartment, it's the people around you, it's the nature, it's finding
absolutely.
places to connect.
Well, what's scary is when fiction sort of predicts future events because that happens all the time. Like in books I read, in books I've written, I have two YA novels that are about a pandemic. And when COVID hit, I was just like, oh my God, I was doing the research for this, for a year. And here we are. And it's literally all the things I read about and put in the book. Um, and then home, I got my first physical copy. The book comes out in March, but they send the authors a copy early. And I got my copy and I was reading through it. And then the fires hit. And, I was so scared because a lot of friends of mine have lost their homes and
Right.
it's scary. And there's a line in the book that just is so eerie to me now because it says, but one day you may learn what it means when a home is lost. And then it says, thick black smoke may blanket the sky. And I was just looking at this, this text and going, oh my gosh, that's so strange. But then again, is it that strange? We've seen this uptick in fires that are getting closer and closer to, you know, more dense areas. So maybe it's a predictive line, or maybe it's just reading the tea leaves.
Right. And hopefully it's, as a cautionary tale, a reminder that we still have time to change,
Yeah,
and systemically, there's a lot of change that needs to happen, but we can also do it on our individual lives, on our community levels, and work from the ground up. It's sort of we're planting
definitely.
the seeds.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And I would assume, and I'm making a big assumption here, but I would assume having a son and a daughter has shifted sort of the way that you look at books and look at writing, look at the world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In so many different ways. One of my favorite ways it's shifted is a lot of my friends are writers and, they're annoying. These writers they can be annoying. But then you read their work to your children and you go, oh, you actually are pretty cool. you know, uh, I just loved watching my kids wake up to the world through books. And like to me, the most important thing you have to be as an author is humble because this equation doesn't center the author, right? I remember there was a campaign, a Twitter campaign way back in the day. Somebody said, YA is too dark, and then somebody countered that with YA saves lives. And I remember like this was going, wild on Twitter and stuff, back in the day when that would happen. And then I remember thinking, well, YA isn't too dark. I think that's too far. But I also think YA saves us too far too, because what's really happening there is a young reader, a young person, is saving themselves while maybe using your book as a tool, you know? But
Yeah.
if it wasn't your book, they'd find hopefully another tool. So I love the humility of just understanding your book as a vehicle to conversations between a parent and a child, teacher in a classroom, or maybe just two friends. And if you can be humble like that, then I think you can recognize like how valuable great literature is. And I think I've seen that with my children. So that's the most important part. But also, I'm right next to them, and they sort of put my own career into perspective because I think I will always say I'm a parent first, and a author second. Whereas maybe 11 years ago, I would have said, oh, well, my whole life is wrapped around in stories. That's all I am. That's all I can be. But now I'm like, being a dad is the most important thing in the world to me. But also, I'm right next to their psychology and I'm watching them work through things. I'm watching reactions that are surprising to me and trying to think through where that came from. And what I love most about books is when they explore not just what happens, but why it happened or who this character is in this context.
I love that. I think it was when you won the Newbery, when you did your acceptance speech, you said something that has really resonated with my college students. I teach teachers and librarians. And
Okay.
I think it was during that particular speech that you talked about the reason we should be stocking our libraries with diverse books, that how many wizards have we seen in our day to day
Yeah.
life?
Yeah.
And that particular line has had such a huge impact on librarians and teachers for the last almost 10 years.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I hear it every semester from people who are like, I hadn't thought about it that way, but he's right.
Yeah.
We have these fantasy books, but our kids deserve to see each other and
Yeah.
to be able to see themselves and each other to learn and grow. And as you said, to have the books as tools.
Yeah,
There
exactly.
are opportunities for conversation. And it feels like today we're sort of at this tipping point in America where people are afraid to have the conversations.
Yeah.
And
100%.
I'm wondering what you would say to calm communities that are caught up in that right now. Because I know
Well,
you've been involved in, or your books have been involved
yeah,
in some of that.
in some of the bannings, yeah. I think one of the best things about writing for young people is you're writing for an audience that's still grappling with what they think, what they believe, who they want to be. Whereas if you write for adults, which is another amazing thing to do, but you're writing for an audience that sort of wants to find a book that reinforces what they already believe. So, like a lot of adult readers, we read to reinforce our current ideology. We read to say, oh, yeah, that's what I think too. And yeah, see, I knew that. But I wish more people would consider reading things that challenged their ideas. And maybe it'll reinforce your ideology even more because you tested it. So to me, I love this idea of like going outside of your close little group to explore ideas, to challenge your own ideas. So there's that. And then you get to the bannings, and that is so just rooted in fear. It's like, well, we have this belief system, and any book that comes along that shows us another idea, we've got to keep it away, or else maybe that might grow in our little safe space. And that's what you see. When I wrote the book Milo Imagines the World, in my mind, I thought, okay, I'm probably going to get some challenges based on like this idea of critical race theory, because I kind of had been caught up in that before, which by the way, I actively never want to be a part of any group. I don't want to be easily defined that way.
Right.
But so that's what I was expecting. And then when it started to get challenged, and it wasn't about that, it was about, there's a one little illustration about a same-sex couple. Um, and it's just very quiet. The text does not suggest this, but it's just in one illustration. And that became the challenge. And you just go, wow, that's so interesting to watch the psychology of the book challenge. You see that it's just getting picked up in the momentum of a political ideology. Um, and I wrote a book called Superman Dawnbreaker about Superman when he was a teen. And I saw that happen with that too, only in a racial category. And so I just, you're right. We don't have these conversations because everyone is so scared to make a mistake. But I think the mistake they're scared of making might offend their in-group. They're not scared to go after the out-group,
Right.
but they're scared to offend the in-group, and that is to me super unhealthy. I think the in-group is the place where you should be in the lab with your ideas, kind of experiment, get challenged by your in-group so that it can become stronger and more what you hope to, more the purest form of what you're hoping to have your opinion be. I think the in-group should be the lab, not the censor.
That makes a lot of sense. And often I think we get caught up in the echo chamber of our in group as well. And
Yes.
so if we're not willing to test ideas outside of that and to engage in conversations that aren't so fear driven,
Yes.
we lose so much. I mean, that was one little piece of Milo, and it really discounts all the other really critical parts about that book, because when we talk
Yeah.
about windows and mirrors, there are so few books that show a child with a parent who's in prison and show a loving relationship in the way that your book did. It feels like you're tossing out the baby over a very small detail
Exactly.
that you could have a conversation about. And
Exactly.
if your belief system is different than what you see, have a conversation with your children about it.
Yeah. In that illustration, by the way, I'm aware of the calibration part, right? So when I wrote a note for Christian Robinson, the illustrator, I just said, well, maybe when he re-envisions who this wedding dress woman was going off to marry, maybe he considers, a same-sex couple. But that's me calibrating it because I didn't put it in the text because then it would be too loud. And it's like,
Right.
oh, this sort of like is too bright for everything else in the book. So you have to kind of like dim that part. Um, and you hope it's the correct calibration. But then again, it just depends on who's reading it and what they
Sure,
want to
of
do
course.
with it.
And I found, for me, again, with a love of the city and, having grown up around cities, it was a very accurate depiction of the things that you're going to see on a subway or on a
Yeah.
bus.
Yeah.
It's life. It's who's in our community, and
Yeah.
shouldn't be discounting anybody.
Yeah. It's just reflective.
It's totally reflective. I had read you had talked about often you write on the outside of an in group, or you feel like you're
Yeah.
observing things that way. And I was wondering, does it still feel that way? You said this a few years
Yes.
back.
Yes. I actually I haven't heard this idea in so long. So it's what a gift to be able to go back to this idea. Like I believe in, the power of own voices. But I think sometimes in an own voice category, it's somebody who's closer to the margins who sometimes can see it in a new way or see it objectively. So, me, obviously being a mixed race kid, I think about it from the point of view of race. And I've always felt like very on the margins of the Mexican side of my culture, but also very on the margins of the white side of my makeup. But it allows me to sort of study it from an objective point of view. But also, from somebody who was a college athlete, that's how I got to college, became the first in my family thanks to a sport. My definition, self-definition was basketball all the way up until I was probably 22, 23. That's all I was. That's how people saw me too. And then kind of sticking a toe in the world of the arts. First just writing some poems and some stories in undergrad, then going to graduate school for creative writing and feeling like I was kind of on the outside of it because I wasn't the artsy person. I was like this athlete who's kind of trying to come into this space. And then, of course, publishing my own books, but never feeling like totally on the inside. It like allows me to kind of see the industry of children's books in a unique way. Some people, their whole life, this is what they wanted to do. They're on the very center of it and they'll see it one way. But me over here on the margins, I just see it a slightly different way. And to me, it's a gift. It's a total gift to be like near the margins of a group.
Well, and I feel like that's good news for all of us because I think it's very seldom that anybody is totally in the center of
Yeah,
a
you're
group.
right.
You're kind of always on the outside of something.
It's so true.
And if you can view it as a superpower and an ability to see and to bridge and connect, that could help bring change.
You know what? You are making so much sense with that because maybe like reporting from the side, maybe that can connect with a lot of readers because we all have this imposter syndrome in so
Yes.
many groups, right? So maybe there's a feeling of connection if you report from that space, because people that can identify. Yeah, I think that's very true.
I mean, I think we all have that moment of imposter syndrome for sure.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
And if you don't, then I think that that's your own version of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, and if you don't, some people better like pull you aside.
Exactly. It's time for a conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to ask, do you have a copy of Home with you? And is there a page you'd like to share with us?
Well, it's interesting because I could share my screen. I just don't have a physical copy. Would you want
That
me
would
to
be
do that?
great. Let me
Okay.
make sure you are a co-host, and I
Oh,
will,
I would love to share a page. That's awesome.
because I would love to be able to show that to folks. So let me.
Nobody has seen this.
I'm
This
so
is
excited. I have not seen it yet. I don't have my copy, but I can't wait to get it. Like, I'm so
oh,
excited for
here we go.
this.
Okay, so you know what? I'll share my screen and I'll take you through just a couple things. Is that okay? Like maybe
Yeah,
two or
please.
three.
You can
I'll,
do as much as you want.
okay, I'll start with the cover. So obviously this is Loren Long, and I love working with Loren because I think he's an incredible artist, but a beautiful human being, and he's one of my favorite people in kids' books. This cover actually says so much because in a book called Home, the cover has no house. There's no physical structure. And so that's very intentional, about what you're getting into. This is a book that is challenging that notion of the house as home. Okay, let me give you a couple of my favorite images. Um, okay, so this is a big one. Now here we have the disruption that is similar flow or structure as love, where there's a disruption that challenges your understanding of home, but a day may come when you learn how a home can be lost. Hurricane rains flood your streets, or a thick black smoke blankets the sky, or Papa's garment factory closes down. And we see, the devastation in this community. We see this tree has been just kind of ripped in half, and obviously the home is greatly damaged. But we also see people trying to do something to help the situation, right? We have first responders, but we also have this very important note here of the family together, physically holding each other together, and the little puppy there. So this is to me one of my, I guess, the most profound moments for me as a writer and seeing the illustration, because we're going to come back to this at the end. One of the things Loren did, that I think is really important is I guess you could see it on this page. So through the back window of an old truck, you watch the only home you've ever known grow smaller and smaller behind you. And here we have this little girl looking at her home in her mind mentally saying goodbye to this place that she thinks is home. This is the only concept she has of home. She's looking out. We also have the parents devastated because they couldn't afford to keep living here because maybe somebody lost their job. And they're thinking their own thoughts, looking out their windows, right? So everyone is, their gaze is somewhere different. But what especially the child doesn't understand is that if you look at the structure, the physical negative space here of the picture, she's in a what looks like almost the shape of a home, which is her parents. And so they are her support system. They are her structure of her life. They are her home. So even though she's driving away from the house, she's leaving with her home. And so that to me is a profound picture. I'll just show you one more because I wanted to
Keep
get back.
going. I'm enjoying this.
Well, near the end, we have this turn to the earth. But I wanted to get back to this. Okay, so I'm just going to read you the last couple pages, if that's okay.
Okay,
So
please do.
home, it's the thump, thump, thump of your own human heart as you stand in a forest of redwoods or wade into a glass-covered lake. So this reminds me of your hike through the trees that have been there so long in the slow lane. It's the thump, thump, thump of the earth's sentimental song, inviting you into the harmony of things, promising that all life is one life. And when the winds do come, they will carry you home. And now we have a revisiting of that one image where the house was destroyed. Now they've rebuilt. And you can see the neighborhood we've pulled back, and we can see the neighborhood around they're rebuilding. And this is a sign of human resilience. But what I love is they've integrated a symbol of the power of the earth. And they kept that tree that's been sheared by the wind intact. They left it there. They didn't take it out and replace it. They left it. And for me, that's like a symbol of an integration between earth and human. So instead of living against the earth, they're living alongside the earth. And I think, like, to me, that's hopefully the message of the book.
I think that's so powerful, and I cannot wait to get my hands on home. So, families, teachers, if you're listening, pre-order it now. You're going to really want it. I'll make sure there are links in the show notes.
Awesome.
And Matt, I'm going to close with a final question that I like to ask everybody.
Sure.
What currently brings you hope?
Hmm. I would say young people. I just, I was in Greenville, South Carolina recently, and I love seeing kids from different communities that are different from the one where I was the week before, because in this case I was in Walnut Creek, Northern California town. But I'm in Greenville, and this is South Carolina, and I'm saying I'm from California, and they're so excited to tell me about their town, and what's happening in their communities, and what coffee shop I should go check out, and what restaurant. Oh, you've got to check out this one bridge. And their excitement and their pride in their community, to me, gives me so much hope. I think sometimes we as adults, we lock in on the news and the roller coaster of the headlines. And it's like there's all this anxiety attached to every new thing that's happening every day. And what gives me hope is I go to Greenville, South Carolina, and they're not concerned with that. The young people in the community, they just want to tell me about their neighborhood and their pet, or their sibling who's sick and not at school today, and they have to bring the homework to them. So I think, to me, it's young people. And then I also have to add, just loving my family, like, is the thing that gives me the hope. Like, every time I take a long walk, I'm always thinking about, God, I'm so lucky to have this family, these children, and I get to watch them grow up.
That's wonderful. And thank you for sharing them with us occasionally on Instagram. I love your daughter's book reviews.
Oh,
Those have been so much fun to follow because, again, as you said, she keeps it real when she tells
she
you what
does.
she thinks. And I love that. Matt, thank you so much for joining us on the Adventures in Learning podcast today. It has been such a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much, and say hi to all your students for me.
I will.